Dr. Pimple Popper. Sandra Lee thought she was simply exhausted after a long day of filming. Then her speech became slurred. Her body began feeling strangely weak, and she realized something was seriously wrong. An MRI confirmed what she never expected. She had suffered an ischemic stroke at just 55. Now, after months of recovery, Sandra Lee is revealing what happened next and how close she came to wondering if she could ever perform surgery again. For years, Dr. Sandra Lee appeared to be the picture of confidence.
So I got this bump.
Okay.
It was first noticeable, '05. So
Okay.
it's been a while.
Okay.
And then within the last 5 to 6 years,
Millions watched her perform procedures, explain medical conditions, and calmly handle cases that would make most people uncomfortable. But behind that steady presence was a health scare she never expected.
Dr. Sandra Lee suffered an ischemic stroke, a blood clot in the brain that cuts off communication to the body. And initially ignoring her symptoms made it worse.
In 2025, Lee revealed that she had suffered an ischemic stroke after experiencing symptoms that initially seemed easy to dismiss. She later described feeling extremely tired and noticing that something was wrong with her speech. What made the experience especially frightening was how quickly an ordinary day could turn into a medical emergency. For someone whose career depends on precision, concentration, and steady hands, the implications were enormous. Would she be able to return to performing procedures? Would the effects linger? And perhaps most importantly, why had this happened to her in the first place? As Sandra began recovering, she had to confront questions that were far more personal than anything she had faced on television. Her fans saw the successful dermatologist and television personality. Behind the scenes, she was suddenly a patient herself, trying to understand what her body had just endured.
And then I had just a lot of stress that happened on the right side of my head, my brain. And so you have like deficits on the opposite side. So I essentially
The biggest twist came when Sandra realized the stroke could threaten the very career that had made her famous. As a dermatologist who performs precise procedures, she depends on steady hands, balance, concentration, and clear communication. After the ischemic stroke, the left side of her body was affected, including her hand, and her speech became difficult. For a doctor accustomed to helping other people through medical emergencies, suddenly becoming the patient was deeply frightening. She later admitted that she wondered whether she would ever be able to perform surgery again. Then came the long road back. Sandra stopped filming and spent about 2 months undergoing physical and occupational therapy, working specifically on movement and control. She eventually returned to filming in January and gradually returned to performing procedures. Although she has described herself as nearly back to normal, she has acknowledged that some symptoms can still appear when she becomes exhausted or stressed. Her recovery was not simply about getting back on television. It was about rebuilding confidence in the hands and body she relies on every day. But there was another realization that changed how Sandra viewed the entire experience. She said high blood pressure, cholesterol, and stress had been contributing factors, and the stroke forced her to take her own health more seriously. What initially felt like a devastating interruption gradually became a warning she wanted other people to hear. For Sandra Lee, the frightening experience wasn't the end of her story. It became the beginning of a very different chapter. For Sandra Lee, the hardest part of the stroke wasn't simply realizing that she had become a patient. It was confronting the possibility that the career she had spent decades building might suddenly change. She is a dermatologist who depends on precision, and even a small difference in the strength or control of her left hand could feel enormous. After 2 months of physical and occupational therapy, she returned to filming in January. But the experience had changed her perspective. she was no longer taking her health for granted. The emotional impact reached even deeper because Sandra had recently entered a new chapter of family life. Her 2 sons had gone off to college, leaving her and her husband, fellow dermatologist Jeffrey Rabish, adjusting to becoming empty nesters. Then, while she was still navigating that transition, the stroke forced her to confront a frightening question she had never expected to ask. Would she be there to see her children grow older and eventually meet her grandchildren? She later said the experience reminded her to take better care of herself and spend more time enjoying her family and friends. Yet Sandra refused to let fear become the final chapter. She continued rehabilitation, returned to her work, and found unexpected ways to rebuild her strength, including playing classical guitar and taking up activities such as pickleball and golf. Her recovery wasn't simply about getting back on television, it was about learning to trust her body again and appreciating the ordinary moments she might once have taken for granted. And perhaps that's the most emotional part of her story. The doctor who spent years helping patients reclaim their confidence suddenly had to learn how to rebuild her own. The most unexpected part of Sandra Lee's recovery is that she now sees the stroke differently. What first felt like a terrifying interruption became a warning she believes she needed to hear. Lee has acknowledged that her blood pressure and cholesterol were not under control, while the stress of balancing her medical practice and television career added another layer of pressure. After months of physical and occupational therapy, she returned to filming in January 2026 and gradually returned to performing procedures. Her symptoms are now largely resolved, although fatigue and stress can still remind her of what happened. For someone who spends her life helping patients, becoming a patient herself changed the way she looks at health. Sandra has described the experience as a blessing in disguise because it forced her to slow down and take better care of herself. The doctor millions know as Dr. Pimple Popper didn't simply recover her ability to work. She gained a renewed appreciation for her family, her career, and the ordinary moments that can suddenly become precious. Sandra Lee's stroke changed the way she sees life, family, and even her own health. But she didn't let fear define her future. She recovered, returned to her work, and found a deeper appreciation for every ordinary moment. If her journey touched you, subscribe to Legend Discovery for more true stories of strength and resilience.